The steak arrived on a steaming plate, the charred edges hissing softly as the server placed it in front of Jack Carrington. For a moment, he stared, knife in hand, as the aroma of exotic spices wafted up. But something about the meal felt off. The rare pink center looked too lively, almost glowing faintly under the dim restaurant lights. He prodded it with his fork, and that's when it twitched. Jack froze. The restaurant, nestled deep in the heart of the alien bazaar, had a reputation for its exclusivity. Rare delicacies, they'd promised, boasting dishes sourced from every corner of the galaxy. But the thing on his plate wasn't food. It was alive. A soft gasp escaped his lips as the steak uncurled, revealing a humanoid figure no larger than a child, with delicate features and skin that shimmered like light through lavender mist. Her eyes opened, wide and terrified, locking onto his. Jack dropped the fork, his military instincts kicking in. He'd seen plenty of strange things in his time serving in the Federation Wars, but this was a new level of disturbing. The girl, clearly alien, began to stir. Before Jack could react further, her small hands gripped the edge of the plate, and she struggled upright. Her whispered words were unintelligible, but the fear in her trembling voice transcended language. A tall, gaunt figure dressed in flowing black robes approached, the restaurant's owner. His thin lips curved into a practiced smile. "A fine choice, sir. Freshly harvested, rare and priceless. Enjoy." "Harvested?" Jack spat, pushing his chair back and standing. "What is this? She's not food, she's alive." The owner's smile faltered. "A unique specimen bred for culinary excellence. Her kind are a delicacy among the elite. Surely you understand the honor." Jack's hand hovered near his waist instinctively, but he wasn't armed. Not here. The girl whimpered, clinging to his arm. Her large, expressive eyes begged for help, and something deep within Jack snapped. Memories of civilians caught in the crossfire of battles he'd fought came flooding back. He wasn't about to let this happen. "No. She's coming with me." His voice was firm, low, and dangerous. The owner's expression hardened, and two burly guards stepped forward, blocking the exit. "I must insist, sir. Once served, the dish cannot leave. It is a matter of policy." Jack turned his attention to the girl. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, her movements unsteady but determined. "Stay close," he whispered. The guards advanced, their hulking forms casting long shadows over the ornate decor. Jack grabbed the plate and hurled it at one of them, catching the brute, off guard as it shattered against his head. Chaos erupted. Diners screamed, tables overturned, and Jack seized the moment to pull the girl toward the nearest exit. The guards were fast, but Jack was faster. Years of combat had honed his reflexes, and even without a weapon, he knew how to improvise. Diving over a table, he grabbed a decorative vase and smashed it against the second guard's face, leaving him stumbling. The girl followed close behind, her small frame agile as she darted through the chaos. They burst through the back kitchen, dodging startled chefs and scalding pots of alien broth. Jack spotted an emergency exit and slammed into it with his shoulder, the door giving way under the force. Outside, the cool night air was a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the restaurant. The alien bazaar stretched out before them, a labyrinth of glowing stalls, flickering holograms, and the low hum of distant engines. Jack pulled the girl into the shadows, crouching behind a stack of crates. "Who are you?" he asked, his breath ragged. Her voice was soft, melodic, and laced with desperation. "Amara. I was taken. Sold." She touched her temples briefly, wincing as if recalling the memory hurt. "Please, don't let them take me back." Jack studied her for a moment. Her lavender skin shimmered faintly in the moonlight, and her features were delicate yet striking. Despite the alien physiology, there was a humanity in her eyes, a raw, unfiltered plea for safety. He exhaled sharply. "You're safe now. I'll make sure of it." A shout echoed in the distance, followed by the unmistakable clatter of boots on metal. The guards were coming. Jack grabbed Amara's hand and pulled her to her feet. "We need to keep moving." They navigated the maze of alleys, Jack's military training guiding them through the most obscure paths. Amara clung to him, her steps faltering but determined. Occasionally she would glance back, her fear palpable. Jack tightened his grip on her hand. Don't look back. Focus on moving. As they rounded a corner, they encountered a patrol, drone hovering ominously in the narrow passage. Jack reacted instantly, grabbing a loose pipe from the ground and hurling it at the drone's sensor array. Sparks flew as the drone spun out of control, crashing into the wall. Amara gasped. How did you— Keep moving, Jack interrupted, urgency in his tone. They didn't have time for explanations. Finally, they reached a quieter part of the station, an abandoned docking bay. Jack leaned against a bulkhead, catching his breath. Amara slumped beside him, her trembling hands clutching at his sleeve. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the station. I owe you my life. Jack shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Just stay out of sight for now. I'll figure out a way to get you off this station. Amara's wide eyes searched his face as though trying to read his intentions. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Jack hesitated, the weight of his past pressing against his chest. Because someone has to, and I've already failed too many people to let it happen again. Her expression softened, and for the first time, a hint of a smile played at her lips. Then I trust you, Jack Carrington. The sound of distant boots and raised voices shattered the moment. They weren't safe yet. Jack scanned the docking bay for options. It was dimly lit, with old cargo crates scattered haphazardly around the edges, and a few derelict ships half hidden in the shadows. The faint hum of station machinery reverberated through the metallic walls, but above it, the guards' voices grew louder. Time was running out. This way, he said, tugging Amara toward the far end of the bay. A bulky freighter loomed ahead, its hull rusted and patched in places. It looked barely operational, but Jack's trained eye noticed the faint flicker of an active power core. Someone had been here recently. Amara stumbled slightly as they moved, her legs shaky from exhaustion. What if they find us, she asked, her voice trembling. They won't, Jack said, his tone firm, not if we move quickly. He didn't let his own doubts show. She didn't need to see that he wasn't entirely sure of their escape plan. Reaching the freighter, Jack found the access panel near the rear hatch. He pried it open, exposing a mess of tangled wires and circuits. Stay close and keep an eye out, he instructed, pulling a multi-tool from his jacket. Amara nodded, crouching beside him as she scanned the area nervously. The wiring was a nightmare. Whoever last worked on this ship had either been drunk or deliberately sabotaging it. Jack muttered under his breath as he stripped and reconnected wires, bypassing the main security protocols. Sparks flew, and for a moment the panel hissed angrily before a low chime signaled success. The hatch hissed open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Inside now, Jack said, ushering Amara in, before following and sealing the hatch behind them. The interior of the freighter was as dilapidated as its exterior. Loose wires dangled from the ceiling, and the smell of oil and stale air hung heavy. Jack found the cockpit quickly, its controls covered in dust but intact. He slid into the pilot's seat and began powering up the systems, fingers dancing across the console. Amara stood behind him, her arms wrapped around herself. Do you know how to fly this thing? Jack glanced back, offering a faint smile. I've flown worse. It wasn't entirely true. This ship looked like it could fall apart mid-flight, but he wasn't about to admit that. As the engine sputtered to life, the freighter groaned, shaking as if protesting the effort. The lights flickered but held steady. Jack checked the scanners and cursed under his breath. The guards were closing in, their signatures bright blips on the display. They're almost here, Amara whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Jack activated the ship's comm system and tuned it to the station's docking authority. Freighter X-32 requesting emergency clearance for departure, he said, keeping his voice calm but firm. There was no response. He tried again. X-32, urgent clearance requested. Hostile pursuit imminent. This time, static crackled before a voice replied, monotone and devoid of concern. "Clearance denied. Please await inspection." Jack slammed his fist against the console. "Figures." He turned to Amara. "We're doing this the hard way." "What does that mean?" she asked, her eyes widening. Jack grinned, flipping a series of switches. "It means hold on to something." The freighter jolted as he forced the engines into overdrive. Alarms blared, warning him of unauthorized departure procedures, but he ignored them. The docking clamps released with a screech, and the ship lurched forward, scraping against the bay walls as it moved. The guards burst into the docking bay, just as the freighter lifted off. Jack caught a glimpse of them through the rear monitor, their weapons drawn and aimed. Bolts of plasma fired, striking the ship's hull with flashes of light. Amara yelped, clutching the back of his seat. "Relax," Jack said, though his heart pounded in his chest. "This old bucket can take a few hits." He wasn't entirely sure about that, but it was too late to second guess. The freighter cleared the docking bay and shot into the void of space. Jack pushed the engines harder, the ship trembling as it accelerated. The scanners beeped again, signaling incoming ships. 2 sleek patrol craft had launched from the station, their silhouettes cutting through the darkness as they closed in. "They're following us," Amara cried. "I see them," Jack replied, steering the freighter into an asteroid field. The patrol craft followed, their weapons firing in bursts. The freighter's shields flared, absorbing the impacts, but the system was already showing signs of strain. Jack maneuvered through the asteroids with practiced precision, weaving between massive rocks that drifted lazily through space. The patrol craft were faster and more agile, but the freighter's bulk gave it momentum, allowing Jack to make tight turns that forced the smaller ships to adjust their trajectories. Amara clung to the seat, her knuckles white. "How are you? Doing this?" "Years of practice," Jack said, dodging another volley of plasma fire. He spotted a particularly dense cluster of asteroids ahead and angled the freighter toward it. "Hang on, this might get rough." The ship plunged into the cluster, the asteroids so close they seemed to scrape the hull. Jack used the terrain to his advantage, leading the patrol craft into tight spaces where their speed worked against them. One of the ships clipped an asteroid, spinning out of control before exploding in a fiery burst. "Yes!" Amara exclaimed, a rare smile breaking through her fear. "Don't celebrate yet," Jack warned. The remaining patrol craft was still on their tail, its weapons relentlessly targeting the freighter. A warning light flashed on the console, shields critical. Jack cursed under his breath. Thinking quickly, he veered toward a massive asteroid with a cavernous opening. "We're going in," he announced, not giving Amara time to protest. The freighter dove into the asteroid's interior, the patrol craft following close behind. The tunnel was narrow, the walls jagged and uneven. Jack gritted his teeth, focusing on every turn and twist. The patrol craft fired again, but the shots struck the walls, sending debris flying. Jack spotted an opening ahead and accelerated. The freighter burst out of the asteroid just as the patrol craft fired another shot. The impact destabilized the tunnel, and the asteroid collapsed, trapping the patrol craft inside. Amara let out a shaky breath. "We're alive." "Barely," Jack muttered, checking the ship's status. The freighter was in rough shape, but it was holding together, for now. He turned to Amara, who looked at him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You're incredible," she said softly. Jack chuckled, leaning back in the pilot's seat. "Just doing what I do best, getting out of trouble." But as he looked at her, he realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. Something deeper was driving him, a connection he couldn't quite explain. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was fighting for more than just himself. Jack let the freighter drift in the relative safety of the asteroid belt, its battered hull creaking under the strain of recent events. The damage report flashing across the console was grim, shields nearly depleted, hull integrity compromised, and the engines running hotter than he liked. But they were alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. Amara slumped into the co-pilot's seat, her breathing slowly steadying. "So what now? Do we just keep running?" Jack glanced. at her, noticing the exhaustion etched into her features. She was trying to keep it together, but the strain was evident. We need a place to lay low and make repairs, somewhere out of the patrol's reach. Her gaze shifted to the view outside the cockpit, the asteroid field stretching endlessly. Into the void. Do you have somewhere in mind? Jack hesitated. There's a station not far from here, an independent one. They don't ask questions as long as you've got something to trade. Amara frowned. What if the Syndicate tracks us there? They won't, Jack said confidently, though the truth was less certain. This place operates off the grid. No formal alliances, no Syndicate influence, just smugglers, scavengers, and people looking to disappear. Amara nodded slowly, though she still looked uneasy. Okay, if you think it's safe. It's not, Jack admitted, flashing, her awry smile. But it's safer than staying out here. He keyed in the coordinates, and the freighter's navigation system plotted a course. The engines groaned as they came back to life, propelling the ship toward their destination. As they traveled, silence filled the cockpit, broken only by the occasional beep of the ship's systems. Jack busied himself with monitoring their trajectory, but he could feel Amara's eyes on him. Finally, she broke the quiet. Why are you helping me? She asked, her voice soft but insistent. Jack leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, I'm not sure. Maybe I just like sticking it to the Syndicate. Or maybe... He trailed off, meeting her gaze. Maybe I see something worth fighting for. Her cheeks darkened with a faint purplish blush. You don't even know me. I know enough, he said simply. Enough to know that whatever they had planned for you back there wasn't right. Amara looked away, her expression unreadable. I've spent my whole life being told I'm special, that I have some grand purpose. But all it ever meant was being controlled, used. Jack's jaw tightened. He understood that feeling all too well, being a pawn in someone else's game. Well, you're free now. Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, it's your call. She looked back at him, her eyes shining with a mix of hope and uncertainty. What if I don't know what I want? Then we figure it out, Jack said, his tone resolute. Together. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It wasn't just a promise. It was a declaration. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. The ship shuddered, slightly as they exited the asteroid belt, the navigation system alerting them to their proximity to the station. Jack squinted at the viewport, spotting a faint glimmer in the distance. The station was an old, sprawling construct, its exterior a patchwork of mismatched panels and jury-rigged additions. It floated in the shadows of a dying star, its faint light casting an eerie red glow over the structure. As they approached, a gruff voice crackled over the comms. Unidentified freighter, state your business. Looking for repairs and resupply, Jack replied. Got credits to pay. There was a pause before the voice responded. Docking Bay 3, don't cause trouble. Jack smirked. Wouldn't dream of it. The freighter docked with a metallic clang, the airlock sealing with a hiss. Jack stood, stretching his stiff limbs, and turned to Amara. Stay close, places like this can be unpredictable. Amara nodded, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. I can handle myself. Never doubted it, Jack said with a grin, leading the way to the airlock. The station's interior was just as chaotic as its exterior, a maze of dimly lit corridors lined with vendors hawking contraband, mechanics repairing scavenged parts, and shady figures conducting hushed deals. The air was thick with the scent of grease and smoke, and the hum of conversations created a constant background noise. Jack navigated the chaos with practiced ease, keeping one hand near his sidearm. Amara stayed close, her gaze darting around. As she took in the sights, despite her earlier bravado, she looked uneasy. First stop, repairs, Jack said, leading her to a dingy workshop tucked away in a corner of the station. The mechanic, a grizzled old man with cybernetic limbs, eyed them warily, but didn't ask questions. Jack negotiated the terms, handing over a chunk of their remaining credits. As the mechanic got to work, Jack turned to Amara. "We've got some time. You hungry?" She hesitated. I don't really know what human food is like." Jack chuckled. "Well, you're in for a treat or a shock. Come on." They found a small stall serving a questionable mix of alien and human cuisine. Jack ordered something simple, handing a portion to Amara. She poked at it cautiously before taking a bite, her eyes widening in surprise. "This is good," she said, her tone almost disbelieving. "Told you," Jack said, grinning. Watching her enjoy something so simple was strangely satisfying, and for a brief moment, the chaos around them faded away. But the reprieve was short-lived. Out of the corner of his eye, Jack noticed a group of figures watching them from across the room. Syndicate enforcers. His smile vanished. "We've got company," he muttered, his hand drifting to his weapon. Amara followed his gaze, her expression hardening. "What do we do?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "We finish eating, and then we remind them why it's a bad idea to mess with us." The moment hung thick with tension as Jack and Amara sat in the small food stall, the Syndicate enforcers lingering at the edge of the bustling marketplace. Their predatory gazes swept over the crowd, but it was clear who their targets were. Jack's grip tightened on his fork, his mind racing through possible strategies. "Do they know it's us, or are they just scouting?" Amara asked in a hushed voice, her tone calm but laced with underlying worry. "Doesn't matter," Jack muttered, his eyes flicking between the enforcers and the exits. "We don't wait to find out." Amara nodded, her hand subtly sliding to her side where a small, concealed weapon rested. Jack couldn't help but notice her composure. It was a far cry from the uncertainty she'd shown earlier. She was more than she let on, and he silently resolved to figure out just how much more. "On my signal," he whispered. "We move fast, stick to the shadows, the docking bay isn't far." "Got it," she replied, her gaze steady. Jack counted down silently in his head, his heart pounding. Then, without warning, he tossed his half-eaten plate into the nearest crowd of patrons, creating a brief but chaotic commotion. The diners erupted in startled cries, and Jack seized the moment, grabbing Amara's hand and pulling her into the throng. "Hey!" a voice from the Syndicate group barked. "There they are!" The enforcers surged forward, shoving through the crowd. But Jack and Amara had already disappeared into the twisting labyrinth of the station. The dim corridors blurred past as they sprinted, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. "This way," Jack hissed, yanking Amara down a side passage. The glow of neon signs and flickering lights illuminated their path, but the sound of pursuit grew closer. Amara glanced over her shoulder, her breath coming fast. "They're gaining." "I know," Jack snapped, scanning the environment for an advantage. His eyes landed on a maintenance hatch slightly ajar. Without hesitation, he pulled it open and shoved Amara inside. "Go," he urged, following her into the cramped tunnel. The hatch slammed shut behind them just as their pursuers rounded the corner. The air inside the tunnel was stale, the faint hum of machinery vibrating through the walls. Jack pulled out a small handheld scanner, checking their position relative. "To the docking bay." "This way," he said, motioning for Amara to follow. She crawled after him, her voice low. "What happens if they find us in here?" "They won't," Jack replied, though his tone betrayed his uncertainty. "These tunnels aren't mapped. Even the station workers barely use them." For a while, the only sound was the scrape of their movements through the narrow space. Amara finally broke the silence. "You've done this before, haven't you?" "More times than I'd like to admit," Jack said, shooting her a smirk over his shoulder. "Smugglers like me survive by knowing all the ways to disappear." "Smuggler, huh?" Amara's tone carried a hint of teasing. "And here I thought, you were just a good Samaritan." "Can't I be both?" he quipped, pausing to check the scanner again. "Docking bay's just ahead." They emerged from the tunnel into a dimly lit storage area adjacent to the docking bay. Jack peeked through a crack in the door, spotting their freighter just beyond. A couple of dock workers were milling about, but the Syndicate enforcers hadn't made it this far yet. "We're clear for now," Jack said, stepping aside to let Amara pass. "Let's move." They darted across the bay, sticking to the shadows. The freighter loomed before them, battered but ready. Jack's fingers danced over the access panel, inputting the security code. The ramp lowered with a hiss and they scrambled aboard. "Pre-flight checks are gonna have to wait," Jack muttered, rushing to the cockpit. Amara followed, dropping into the co-pilot's seat. As Jack powered up the ship, the sound of shouting echoed from the docking bay. The enforcers had arrived, weapons drawn. A burst of plasma fire streaked across the hull, rocking the freighter. "They're not giving up, are they?" Amara said, gripping the armrests of her seat. "Not a chance," Jack said through gritted teeth. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off the deck. He pushed the throttle forward, and the freighter surged toward the bay doors. A sudden burst of energy weapons lit up the space ahead, and Jack cursed, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. "They've got turrets online!" Amara's fingers flew across the console, bringing up the targeting system. "Let me help." "Can you shoot?" Jack asked, sparing her a glance. "Try me," she said, her expression hardening. Jack didn't argue. He focused on piloting while Amara locked onto the turrets with practiced efficiency. Moments later, the ship's weapons fired, destroying one turret in a shower of sparks. "Nice shot," Jack called, veering the freighter toward the opening bay doors. The remaining turrets tracked them, but Amara's precise aim took them out one by one. The path cleared, and Jack pushed the engines to their limit, hurtling the freighter into open space. The station shrank behind them, its alarms fading into the distance. Breathless, Jack leaned back in his seat, glancing at Amara. "Remind me never to doubt you again." She smiled faintly, her shoulders relaxing. "I'm full of surprises." Jack laughed, the tension easing. "You and me both, apparently." As the stars stretched out before them, a sense of fragile calm settled over the cockpit. But Jack knew their escape was only temporary. The Syndicate wouldn't stop hunting them, and their troubles were far from over. Still, for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he wasn't running alone. The freighter hummed quietly as it drifted into the void of open space. Jack guided the ship to a safe distance, his fingers tight on the controls, while Amara leaned back in the co-pilot's seat, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. The faint scorch marks on the hull were a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. "That was exhilarating," Amara said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice carried a blend of relief and residual adrenaline. "Exhilarating?" Jack echoed, casting her a sideways glance. "That's one way to describe getting shot at by Syndicate enforcers," she smirked. "Come on, admit it, you live for moments like that." Jack chuckled despite himself. "Maybe I used to. These days I prefer fewer plasma bolts flying at my head." Amara tilted her head, studying him. "Then why risk it? You could have left me behind." Jack hesitated, his gaze fixed on the stars streaking past. "Couldn't just leave you to them," he said finally. "Besides, something tells me you'd have done the same." Her expression softened, and she looked down at her hands. "I've been running for so long. I'm not used to people sticking their necks out for me." "Guess it's your lucky day," Jack said with a faint grin. She met his eyes, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment, the cockpit felt smaller, the hum of the ship's systems fading into the background. Jack cleared his throat and turned back to the controls, breaking the spell. "So," he said, changing the subject, "what's the plan? You've got the Syndicate after you, and now they're after me too. Where do we go from here?" Amara leaned forward, resting her elbows on the console. "There's a safe haven I know of, an independent colony on the edge of the sector. They don't ask questions, and the Syndicate has no jurisdiction there." "Sounds promising," Jack said. "What's the catch?" She gave him a wry smile. "It's not exactly easy to find. The colony's hidden within a dense nebula. Navigation's tricky, and there are rumors of things lurking in the mist." "Great. Nebula monsters," Jack muttered, shaking his head. "Just when I thought this day couldn't get better." Amara laughed softly, the sound surprising both of them. "Don't tell me you're scared." I'm not scared, Jack said defensively. Just cautious. Big difference. Uh-huh, she teased, her smile widening. Jack rolled his eyes, but couldn't help smiling back. Fine, we'll head for your mysterious colony. But if we run into anything with too many teeth, I'm blaming you. Deal, she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. Jack set the course, and the freighter altered its trajectory. The stars ahead grew dimmer as they approached the nebula, its swirling clouds of blue and gold, a stark contrast to the blackness of space. The ship's systems flickered slightly as the density of the nebula began to interfere. This is it, Amara said, her voice quieter now. Keep to the course I'm setting, and whatever happens, don't stray from it. No pressure, Jack muttered, gripping the controls more firmly. As they entered the nebula, visibility dropped dramatically. The clouds pressed against the ship, their colors shifting and churning like a living thing. The sensors struggled to provide clear readings, and Jack had to rely on Amara's directions to navigate. Left, she said sharply. Now right. Slow down. There's a dense patch ahead. Jack followed her instructions, sweat beading on his forehead. Every shadow and flicker outside the viewport looked like a potential threat. Then, without warning, the ship shuddered violently, a low growl reverberating through the hull. Jack's heart leapt into his throat. What was that? He asked, his voice tense. Amara's eyes darted across the console. Something's out there. Another impact rocked the ship, and a shadow passed across the viewport, massive, serpentine, and unmistakably alive. Jack swore under his breath. Monsters, huh? He said, his tone grim. You weren't kidding. I never joke about nebula monsters, Amara quipped, but her hands were moving quickly over the weapon's controls. The creature struck again, its glowing eyes visible through the swirling mist. Jack pushed the engines to maximum, but the ship barely outran its snapping jaws. Can we fight it? He asked. Not unless you've got something that can scare off a space leviathan, Amara replied. Jack glanced at her, his mind racing. What about the ship's reactor? If we overload it, the burst might scare it off. Amara's brow furrowed. That's risky. If we miscalculate, we won't, Jack interrupted. Just tell me what to do. She nodded reluctantly and began rerouting power to the reactor. The ship groaned under the strain, and warning lights flashed across the console. Ready, she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Do it, Jack said. Amara activated the overload sequence, and the ship emitted a blinding pulse of energy. The nebula lit up like a supernova, and the creature let out a deafening roar before retreating into the mist. The ship stabilized, and Jack exhaled heavily, his hands trembling on the controls. Well, that was fun. Amara gave him a tired smile. Welcome to my world. As the nebula began to thin, the faint outlines of a station came into view, a sanctuary amidst the chaos. Jack couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. They'd made it this far together, and for the first time the future didn't seem so bleak. The sanctuary was a stark contrast to the chaos of the nebula. Nestled within the swirling clouds, the colony appeared like a beacon of calm, its soft, pulsating lights casting a warm glow through the mist. The station was a sprawling, organic structure, built into the remains of a massive asteroid. Veins of bioluminescent energy coursed through its surface, giving it an almost living quality. Jack guided the freighter into the docking bay, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. Beside him, Amara leaned forward, her eyes scanning the station with a mix of relief and apprehension. This place is something else, Jack said, his voice low. It's safe, Amara replied, though her tone held a note of uncertainty. At least it used to be. Great, I love when safety comes with a disclaimer. She shot him a look, but there was a flicker of amusement in her expression. Just don't do anything reckless. They don't take kindly to outsiders who stir up trouble. Me? Stir up trouble? Never, Jack said with mock indignation. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the docking bay's atmospheric seals engaged. Jack powered down the engines, and the hum of the freighter faded into silence. Amara stood, adjusting the straps of her gear. Let me do the talking, she said, her tone firm. Jack raised an eyebrow. Since when do I talk too much? Since always. He chuckled, following her toward the airlock. The doors hissed open and they stepped into the station's docking bay. The air was humid and carried a faint metallic tang. The walls glimmered with iridescent patterns that shifted as they moved, almost as if the station were observing them. A group of figures approached, their forms cloaked in flowing garments that shimmered like liquid metal. Their faces were obscured by intricate masks, each one adorned with symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with energy. One of the figures stepped forward, its voice a harmonious blend of tones. State your purpose. Amara inclined her head respectfully. We seek refuge. The Syndicate pursues us. The figure studied her for a long moment before speaking again. You are known to us, Amara. Your presence here is unexpected. Jack's eyebrows shot up. You've got friends in high places, huh? Quiet, Amara muttered, elbowing him lightly. The figure turned its masked face toward Jack. And who is this? Jack Harper, Amara said quickly. He's with me. The figure seemed to consider this, its head tilting slightly. Very well. You may enter. But no. The Syndicate's reach grows longer every day. Your presence may bring danger. We understand, Amara said, her voice steady. The figures stepped aside, and Amara led Jack deeper into the station. The corridors were a labyrinth of soft lights and shifting patterns, the walls pulsing faintly as if alive. Jack couldn't help but marvel at the alien beauty of it all. Care to explain how they know you? He asked, keeping his voice low. Amara hesitated, her gaze fixed ahead. I've been here before, a long time ago. Let's just say I left under complicated circumstances. Complicated how? She sighed. Complicated as in I might have stolen something. Jack stopped in his tracks. You what? It was a desperate situation, she said, turning to face him, and I didn't have a choice. Jack rubbed the bridge of his nose. Of course you didn't. Are you going to lecture me or are we going to keep moving? He sighed, shaking his head. Lead the way, thief. Amara smirked and resumed walking, her pace quickening as they approached a large chamber. The room was circular, its walls lined with strange, glowing plants that emitted a soothing light. In the center stood a pedestal, and around it gathered a group of individuals in elaborate attire. One of them, a tall figure with a commanding presence, stepped forward. Unlike the others, their face was visible, a pale, angular visage marked with faint, glowing tattoos. Amara, the figure said, their voice a mix of curiosity and reproach. You have returned. Hello, Kyros, Amara said, her tone cautious. It's been a while. Kyros's gaze shifted to Jack. And who is this human you've brought into our sanctuary? Jack opened his mouth to speak, but Amara cut him off. He's a friend. He saved my life. Kyros's expression softened slightly, though their eyes remained sharp. Then he is welcome, but you know the rules, Amara. You cannot stay long. I understand, she said. We just need a place to lay low for a while. We'll be gone before we cause any trouble. Kyros's lips curved into a faint smile. Trouble seems to follow you, whether you mean it to or not. Amara's cheeks flushed and Jack stifled a grin. We'll be on our best behavior, he said, earning a glare from Amara. Kyros nodded. Very well. Rest while you can. But be warned, if the Syndicate comes, we will not fight your battles. As Kyros and the others departed, Jack leaned closer to Amara. Seems like you've got quite the reputation. Let's just say, I've lived an interesting life, she replied, her tone dry. Jack chuckled, but his amusement faded as he noticed the flicker of worry in her eyes. Whatever had brought her here before, it was clear she wasn't eager to confront it again. For now, though, they had a moment of peace, a fragile reprieve in a galaxy that seemed determined to keep them on the run. The reprieve was short-lived. Jack barely had time to settle into the dimly lit quarters they'd been assigned when the alarm reverberated through the station. a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It sent a chill down his spine. Amara was already on her feet, her eyes sharp and alert. "That's not a drill." "No kidding," Jack muttered, grabbing his gear. "What now?" She pulled a small device from her pack, its screen flickering to life with a map of the station. "We need to get to the control hub. If it's the Syndicate, we can't let them take the sanctuary." "You think they tracked us here?" Amara hesitated, her expression dark. "They're relentless. If they didn't track us, they might have tracked someone else." Jack frowned but followed her as she slipped into the corridor. The station was alive with motion. Sanctuary inhabitants, humanoid and otherwise, moved quickly, their expressions tense. The organic walls seemed to pulse faster, reacting to the collective fear. As they rounded a corner, a figure appeared, nearly colliding with them. It was Kairos, their glowing tattoos brighter than before, their expression a mixture of determination and concern. "They're here," Kairos said without preamble. "A Syndicate frigate is docked at the outer bay." Amara cursed under her breath. "What's their play?" Kiros's gaze flicked to Jack. "Your human companion might know. Syndicate tactics are brutish." Jack crossed his arms, his mind racing. "They'll try to take out the central systems first. Shut down the sanctuary's defenses and force compliance." Kairos nodded. "Precisely. And they've brought an enforcer." Amara's face paled. "An enforcer, you're sure?" "They've already breached the outer levels. Their presence is unmistakable." Jack didn't need to ask what an enforcer. The tension in Amara's voice said enough. "Then we don't have much time. Where's the central systems room?" Kairos gestured down a side corridor. "I will rally the defense forces. You two must ensure the systems remain secure." "Got it," Jack said, already moving. Amara hesitated for a moment, her gaze lingering on Kairos before she followed. "Jack." The corridors seemed endless, each twist and turn blending into the next. The station groaned as if under pressure, the sound of distant explosions echoing through its halls. Amara glanced at Jack as they ran. "You've dealt with Syndicate soldiers before?" "Not like this," he admitted. "But I know how they think. They're all about control. If they can't take what they want, they'll destroy it." Her jaw tightened. "We can't let that happen." They reached the central systems room, its entrance flanked by heavy doors that pulsed with the same bioluminescence as the rest of the station. Jack placed his hand on the panel, but the doors remained sealed. "Let me," Amara said, stepping forward. She produced a small, jagged device and inserted it into a hidden slot on the wall. The lights on the door flickered, and with a hiss, they slid open. Inside, the room was a hive of alien technology. Organic conduits stretched from floor to ceiling, their surfaces shimmering with streams of data. In the center stood a massive console, its interface alive with shifting symbols. Jack moved to the console, his hands hovering over the controls. "I hope this thing is intuitive." "You'll figure it out," Amara said, keeping her eyes on the door. He frowned, deciphering the interface as best he could. "Looks like the defense grid's already taken a hit. If they disable it completely, this place is toast." Amara's voice was tense. "Can you fix it?" "I can try." Before he could begin, the room shuddered violently, and the lights dimmed. A low growl echoed from the corridor outside, sending a chill down Jack's spine. "They're here," Amara whispered, drawing her weapon. Jack worked quickly, his fingers flying over the console. "Keep them off me. I just need a few minutes." The first Syndicate soldier burst into the room, their towering frame clad in black, segmented armor. Their movements were unnervingly precise, their weapon already aimed at Amara. She fired first, her shot striking the soldier's shoulder and forcing them back. But more followed, their heavy boots pounding against the floor. Jack could feel the tension in the air, every nerve on edge as he fought to stabilize the defense systems. Amara ducked behind a console, returning fire with a precision born of desperation. Her shots were measured, each one finding its mark, but the soldiers were relentless, their numbers growing with each passing second. "Hurry, Jack," she shouted, her voice strained. I'm working on it, he snapped, his heart racing. The console's interface was a puzzle of alien logic, but he was starting to piece it together. He rerouted power to the defense grid, bypassing damaged circuits and bringing systems back online. Behind him, the sound of gunfire and clashing metal was deafening. He risked a glance and saw Amara locked in combat with one of the soldiers, her movements swift and fluid. She ducked under a swinging blade, retaliating with a well-placed strike that sent her opponent crashing to the floor. But the Enforcer hadn't arrived yet, and Jack had a sinking feeling they were saving their most dangerous weapon for last. The door to the control room slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. In the doorway stood the Enforcer, a hulking figure encased in black armor, their movements unnaturally smooth despite their size. The mask that covered their face was a smooth, reflective surface, giving nothing away except for the faintest gleam of cold calculation. Amara didn't hesitate. She was already moving before the door fully opened, but Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her back. We need to work together on this one. She shot him a glare, but there was a flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes. You better have a plan. Jack's mind raced. The Enforcer's presence was almost suffocating. If the Syndicate had sent someone this powerful, there was no way they'd get out of this without a fight. He quickly scanned the room, assessing their options. The Enforcer was still standing in the doorway, seemingly content to let them make the first move. I'll distract them, Jack said, his voice low. What? Amara asked, incredulous. Just trust me. You've got the weaponry and the skill to take them down, but you need a window of opportunity. Amara's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded. Be quick. Jack didn't wait for her to change her mind. He grabbed the nearest object, a loose piece of alien tech, and hurled it toward the Enforcer. It crashed against the wall with a loud bang, catching the Enforcer's attention. The Enforcer moved with terrifying speed, their hands snapping out to seize the object. As they turned their attention to Jack, Amara was already in motion, flanking the Enforcer from the side. She took a shot at their exposed weak point, the junction where the armor met the neck. The blast made a sickening noise, but the Enforcer barely flinched. Instead, they swung their weapon toward her with a speed that was almost too fast to track. Amara! Jack shouted, grabbing a blaster from the console and taking aim at the Enforcer's exposed side. He fired, the blast catching the Enforcer off guard. For a split second, the Enforcer staggered back, their focus shifting momentarily between the two of them. Amara used the opening to close the distance, her movements fluid as she lunged forward with her blade. But before she could strike, the Enforcer swatted her aside like an insect, sending her crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. Amara! Jack yelled, panic surging through him. He couldn't lose her, not like this. The Enforcer turned their attention back to Jack, their gaze cold and calculating. They raised their weapon, preparing to strike. But then something unexpected happened. A flare of energy surged from the console, and the room's bioluminescent walls pulsed brighter than before. Jack barely had time to react as a force field shimmered to life around them, blocking the Enforcer's strike. The energy field crackled, absorbing the impact of the blow. What the hell? Jack muttered, looking at the console in confusion. The Enforcer recoiled, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected barrier. Jack saw his chance. Without thinking, he dived toward the console, his fingers flying over the controls. It was a gamble. He didn't fully understand the alien tech, but he could at least redirect enough power to temporarily hold the Enforcer back. He wasn't sure how long it would last, but it was enough for him to shout, Amara, get up! She groaned from the floor but managed to push herself to her feet, her expression a mixture of pain and determination. You have to get this thing offline, she said through gritted teeth. They'll adapt to the energy field. I'm trying, Jack replied, his hands trembling as he worked furiously at the controls. Sweat dripped down his face, but he didn't let up. He had to do this for her, for the colony, for the future. Amara took a few tentative steps forward, but the Enforcer was already recovering, their movements unsettlingly quick. They pressed their hand against the energy field, testing its strength. Jack could see the faintest distortion in the air as the enforcer tried to push through. Come on, Jack muttered, slamming a button in frustration. Finally, there was a click, and the energy field flickered. Jack's heart raced as he prepared for the worst. The enforcer hesitated, then lunged forward, slamming into the weakened force field with a deafening impact. The energy field crackled, sparking violently as it began to break down under the force of the enforcer's blows. Amara acted in the same instant, firing her blaster at the enforcer's exposed shoulder joint. The enforcer let out a hiss of pain, their movements becoming more erratic. But the force field wasn't going to last much longer. Jack knew they needed something more, something drastic. He quickly reached into his jacket, pulling out a small device. It was an experimental EMP grenade, one of the last items he'd salvaged from his old missions. "Amara, move!" Without waiting for a response, he hurled the grenade at the enforcer. The grenade erupted in a burst of light and energy, and the enforcer's movements froze. Their armor sputtered, their body jerking as the EMP took effect. Jack and Amara didn't waste a moment. They rushed forward, Amara delivering the final blow, her blade slicing through the enforcer's armor with brutal precision. The enforcer crumpled to the ground, their body still. Silence fell over the room. Amara collapsed beside the fallen enforcer, panting and bruised. "That was too close," she said, her voice ragged. Jack collapsed onto the console, his heart still pounding. He glanced over at her, his chest tightening with relief and something else, something deeper. "You're not so bad in a fight, you know that?" he said, a tired grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Amara looked at him, her lips curling, into a smile. "I could say the same about you." But there was no time for more words. The station was still under threat, and the Syndicate wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Jack knew one thing for sure, though. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The threat had been neutralized, but the danger wasn't over yet. Jack and Amara shared a brief moment of quiet, their connection stronger than ever, forged in the heat of battle. But outside the control room, the future still hung in the balance. There were more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. They would face them together, or not at all. If you want to see how this story continues and what happens next, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.